Here's a summary of what's unfolding. Eleanor Vance, a devoted mother, receives an outrageous $85,000 wedding bill from her son, Ethan, and his fiancée, Chloe Sterling. Chloe's note demands payment, stating Eleanor should be honored to contribute, despite being explicitly banned from the wedding. Eleanor reflects on a lifetime of sacrifices for Ethan, from selling her wedding ring to missing vacations, contrasting his loving childhood with his current distance. Memories of raising Ethan alone after Arthur's passing, stretching every dollar, flood her. Chloe's past snubs and an unpaid gift loan intensify the betrayal. Holding an old birthday card from Ethan, Eleanor feels her world split. The itemized bill, detailing extravagant expenses like $20,000 for lobster, culminates in Chloe's handwritten line, "It's your legacy after all," igniting a cold fury. Whispering to Arthur's photo, Eleanor questions her past choices, then opens an old notebook, writing a single ominous word, plan. My son's wedding day was supposed to be joyous. Instead, I received an $85,000 bill with a cruel note. You're banned from the wedding but honored to contribute. After a lifetime of sacrifice, this raw insult hit hard. I didn't scream, I just smiled. They'll soon understand the true calm. This is how it all began. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. The envelope felt heavier than it looked, not with bobber, but with an unseen weight, a premonition that settled deep in Eleanor Vance's stomach. It wasn't the thick, embossed cardstock of an invitation. No, this was a sleek, professional-looking business envelope, addressed in a hand she didn't recognize. Her name, Eleanor Vance, stood out starkly against the pristine white. A cold dread traced its way up her spine even before she tore it open. Inside, there wasn't a warm greeting, no joyful announcement. There was a multi-page document, meticulously itemized, and a single crisp note folded once. The note was from Chloe Sterling, her son Ethan's fiancée. Eleanor's eyes scanned the elegant, looping script. "Dear Eleanor," it began, dripping with a false sweetness that made her teeth ache. "As Ethan's mother, we know you'll be honored to contribute to our special day. We've attached the final invoice for your portion of the wedding expenses. We understand this is a significant sum, but it's for your son's future, after all." The sum, casually mentioned as significant, stood out in bold on the first page of the attached invoice. $85,000. $85,000. For a wedding she wasn't even invited to. The explicit ban had come weeks ago, a curt text from Ethan, citing Chloe's wishes for a small, intimate ceremony. Small and intimate, apparently, required enough lobster flown in from Maine to feed a small army at a cost of $20,000. Her gaze flickered over other lines. Artisanal ice sculpture, $5,000. Custom-designed floral arch, $12,000. Each figure was a fresh wound, a testament to a lavishness that mocked her lifetime of careful scrimping. The note continued, a cold, sharp blade twisting in her gut. "While we've decided to keep the guest list very limited, your financial support means the world to us." Financial support, not love, not blessings, just money. Her world, which had always felt so carefully constructed, suddenly seemed to crack down the middle, a chasm opening beneath her feet. She looked around her modest living room, at the worn armchair, the faded photograph on the mantel, a younger Ethan, all gap-toothed grins, perched on his father Arthur's shoulders. "You're my favorite person in the whole wide world, Mom," he'd whispered to her once, clutching a handmade card with crayon hearts. That memory, warm and vibrant, felt like it belonged to a different life, a different son. The Ethan who sent this invoice, through his entitled fiancée, was a stranger. Arthur had passed when Ethan was just 7. Eleanor had sold her wedding ring, a beautiful heirloom, not for a lavish lifestyle, but to keep their small house, to afford Ethan's school trips, to pay for the tutor he needed in math. Vacations? They were a luxury she'd never indulged in, every spare dollar tucked away for Ethan's college fund, for his future, for him. She remembered stretching every grocery budget until it snapped, making sure Ethan never felt the pinch of their poverty, never understood the quiet desperation that hummed beneath her cheerful exterior. And Chloe. The very mention of her name brought a bitter taste to Eleanor's mouth. Chloe, who had borrowed $2,000 from Eleanor for a business opportunity that never materialized, never to be repaid. Chloe, who had, with an icy smile, corrected Eleanor's pronunciation of a French wine at a family dinner, making her feel foolish, inadequate. All of it flashing before her eyes like distorted snapshots from a decaying album. Her hand trembled as she picked up an old, tattered birthday card from a stack on the coffee table. The card was yellowed with age, the crayon drawing of a lopsided house still visible. "I'll always take care of you, Mom," it read in Ethan's childish scrawl. The words, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel joke, twisting in the silence of the room, each syllable echoing the enormity of his betrayal. The memory of her small, kind boy, now a distant, cold figure, made her chest ache with a grief that felt heavier than Arthur's passing. This wasn't just about money. It was about the shattering of a lifelong dream, a mother's deepest hopes. Her eyes drifted back to the itemized bill. Lobster flown in from Maine, $20,000. She could have put a down payment on a small apartment for herself with that, or finally taken that trip to the coast she dreamed of with Arthur, a trip they'd always promised themselves. The sheer audacity of it, the blatant disregard for her sacrifices, twisted into something dark and ugly inside her. Then, scrawled at the bottom of the last page, in Chloe's same elegant hand, was a final damning sentence. "It's your legacy after all." Legacy, the word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implication. Her legacy wasn't money. It was Ethan, the man she had poured her life into. To have that legacy reduced to an $85,000 bill, demanded with such callous indifference, ignited a cold fury, a spark of something dangerous deep within her. The quiet, devoted mother began to shift, a shadow lengthening around her. She rose slowly, walking to the mantelpiece where Arthur's photo smiled back at her, his eyes warm and kind. "Did we do too much, Arthur?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with unshed tears. "Or not enough?" The photo remained silent, offering no comfort, only the ghost of a shared past. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, the weight of years of silent sacrifice pressing down on her. Then, a subtle change. The grief in her eyes hardened, replaced by a glint of steel. She turned from the photo, her movements slow, deliberate. From a bottom drawer of her writing desk, she pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with faded recipes and gardening notes. She found a blank page, picked up a pen, and with a resolve that felt both terrifying and empowering, she wrote one word. Only one. Plan. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. Eleanor sits quietly in her dim kitchen, a cup of mint tea by her side, recalling her advice to Ethan. Every loss is just a rehearsal for your big win. Flipping through an old photo album, she notes Chloe's complete absence from Ethan's formative years. Decisively, Eleanor picks up her phone to initiate her strategic countermove, calling Beatrice Miller, a trusted childhood friend and retired paralegal. She poses a hypothetical. If someone forged your signature on a financial document, what are the consequences? Beatrice's grave reply confirms it's a felony, especially with intent to defraud or manipulate consent, and offers to come by tomorrow, to which Eleanor whispers, "Please." Eleanor's kitchen table transforms into a workspace filled with notes and questions. She realizes she's no longer a forgotten mother, but a woman prepared to act, acknowledging her new power. "They thought they had written the final chapter without me. They had no idea I still had the pen." The kitchen was cloaked in the muted glow of the pre-dawn hour, only a single low-wattage bulb casting long, shifting shadows across the linoleum floor. Eleanor sat at the worn oak table, a steaming mug of mint tea clutched in her hands, its comforting warmth a stark contrast to the icy resolve that had begun to coalesce within her. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, a steady thrum that almost masked the frantic beating of her own heart. She stared into the dark liquid, memories swirling like the steam. "Every loss is just a rehearsal for your big win," she'd told Ethan countless times, cradling his scraped knee or comforting him after a schoolyard disappointment. A simple mantra, born of her own struggles, designed to instill resilience. Now those words echoed back to her, not as a whisper from the past, but as a thundering command for the present. This wasn't a scraped knee, it was a gash in her soul, a betrayal so profound it had fractured the very foundation of her world. And if this was a loss, then the big win would have to be equally monumental. Her gaze drifted to an old photo album lying open on the table, its pages filled with the vibrant, sepia tones of Ethan's childhood. There he was, a toddler with muddy hands, a schoolboy with a missing front tooth, a lanky teenager at his graduation. Every milestone, every smile, every tear, chronicled. Chloe Sterling, however, was conspicuously absent from every single frame, a ghost in a future she had yet to inhabit. She hadn't been there for the scraped knees, the triumphs, the endless sacrifices. She hadn't earned her place in these memories, yet she demanded Eleanor's legacy. The realization solidified. Chloe was an interloper, a thief attempting to steal a history she had no claim to, aided by a son who had forgotten his roots. With a decisive breath that felt like the snapping of an old tether, Eleanor reached for her phone. Her fingers, usually hesitant with technology, moved with a newfound certainty. This wasn't a desperate act. It was the first strategic move in a game she hadn't chosen to play, but was now determined to win. She scrolled through her contacts, pausing at a name she hadn't called in years. Beatrice Miller. Beatrice, with her sharp mind, her no-nonsense demeanor, and her decades of experience as a paralegal before retiring to a quiet life of gardening. Beatrice was an anchor in the choppy waters of Eleanor's past, a friend who knew the quiet strength Eleanor possessed beneath her gentle exterior. The phone rang twice, then a sleepy voice answered. "Eleanor, are you all right? It's awfully early." "Beatrice." Eleanor's voice was surprisingly steady, a calm she hadn't known she possessed. I need your advice. Hypothetically, of course." Beatrice, sensing the underlying tension, immediately sharpened. "Hypotheticals are my specialty, darling. Lay it on me. If someone forged your signature on a financial document, a substantial one, without your knowledge or consent, what are the consequences?" Eleanor chose her words carefully, a cold dread twisting in her stomach at the thought of what she might uncover. The bill was just a demand, but the note from Chloe spoke of Eleanor's portion, as if there was an agreement, a prior understanding that didn't exist. She had a chilling suspicion of what Chloe's wishes might entail. A pause stretched on the line, heavier than the silence in Eleanor's kitchen. Then Beatrice's voice, now entirely awake, dropped to a grave whisper. "Eleanor, that's not just a hypothetical. If it can be proven, especially if there's intention to defraud or manipulate consent, that's a felony, a serious one. Depending on the jurisdiction and the amount, it could mean significant jail time, hefty fines." A shiver, not of fear but of cold vindication, ran down Eleanor's spine. A felony. The word resonated with a dark, satisfying finality. "Is everything all right, Elle?" Beatrice asked, concern coloring her tone. "You sound different." "I will be," Eleanor said, a hint of steel in her voice. Would you be able to come by tomorrow, just to talk?" "Want me to come by tomorrow?" Beatrice offered, not needing to hear more. Eleanor swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. "Please," she whispered, the raw emotion finally breaking through the thin veneer of calm. "Yes, please." After the call, Eleanor didn't return to her tea. Her kitchen table, usually a place for mundane meals and solitary reflection, was swiftly transformed. The incriminating invoice, the cruel note from Chloe, Ethan's old birthday card, and the leather-bound notebook with its single powerful word, plan, were spread out before her like evidence in a nascent investigation. She pulled out old utility bills, bank statements, anything that documented her life, her history of financial sacrifice. Her mind, usually bogged down by the minutiae of daily living, felt incredibly clear, sharp, almost surgical. Questions began to fill the margins of the notebook. What exactly constitutes a forged signature? What is intent to defraud? What evidence do I need? She was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the forgotten mother, the woman who had quietly endured. She was a woman prepared to act, a silent force awakening. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by something colder, something far more dangerous. They had underestimated her. They thought she was just a convenient source of funds, a relic of a past they wished to discard. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Eleanor's lips. They thought they'd written the final chapter without me, she murmured to the quiet kitchen, the words feeling like a vow. They had no idea I still had the pen. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. Beatrice arrives carrying a worn leather folder, ready to assist Eleanor. Over coffee, Eleanor presents the $85,000 wedding bill and a copy of the wedding venue agreement. Beatrice's eyes narrow at the signature, declaring, "This isn't your signature," a fact Eleanor confirms, almost certain it's Chloe's handwriting. Beatrice outlines the serious legal ramifications. You could press charges, financial fraud, identity misuse. Eleanor clarifies her intent. I'm not looking to ruin them. I just want them to understand that what they did has consequences. They methodically draft a legally sound statement, clear and firm. Beatrice's parting wisdom is, Eleanor, they don't get to define who you are. Not anymore. You're the one holding the match. Light it when you're ready. Eleanor, empowered, writes a new word in her notebook. Watch. Yet the scent of freshly brewed coffee filled Eleanor's kitchen the next morning. A comforting aroma that did little to ease the tension thrumming beneath her skin. Beatrice Miller arrived promptly, not with the hesitant knock of a casual visitor, but with a brisk, purposeful rap on the door. In her hand, she carried a worn leather folder, its edges softened by years of use, brimming with the quiet authority of legal documentation. Her eyes, usually twinkling with good humor, were sharp and focused as she took in Eleanor's determined expression. "Morning, Elle," Beatrice said, her voice a warm, reassuring presence. "Let's get this kettle boiling." Soon they were seated at the kitchen table, the very table that had transformed into Eleanor's strategic command center. A fresh cup of coffee steamed before each of them, but Eleanor's was untouched, her attention entirely on the documents spread between them. She pushed the $85,000 wedding bill across the table first, its stark numbers a cold testament to the disrespect she'd endured. Then, with a deep breath, she slid over the critical piece, a copy of the wedding venue agreement, which she'd found tucked inside the envelope along with the invoice, as if they expected her to simply pay the contract she'd supposedly signed. Beatrice donned a pair of reading glasses, her gaze sweeping over the elaborate itemization, a faint frown creasing her brow at the exorbitant sums. Her attention then shifted to the venue agreement. Her eyes narrowed as she reached the signature line, specifically at the sprawling, elegant script that clearly read Eleanor Vance. She leaned closer, tracing the loops and flourishes with a discerning finger. "Eleanor," Beatrice said, her voice low and grave, "this isn't your signature." It wasn't a question, but a quiet, firm declaration. Eleanor nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I know, it's too fancy. Mine's more practical, you know, and the E is different." A chilling certainty settled over her. Chloe's handwriting, I'm almost certain. She had seen Chloe's script on the cruel note, on thank you cards from years past. There was a similarity, a distinctive flourish. Beatrice picked up both documents, holding them side by side. "The style matches the note perfectly. And you never signed this, never gave consent for someone else to sign it?" "Never once," Eleanor confirmed, her voice unwavering. "I wasn't even invited to the wedding, Beatrice. Why would I sign a contract for it, let alone agree to pay $85,000? Beatrice closed her eyes for a moment, a slow shake of her head. "Eleanor, this is serious. You could press charges. This is clear financial fraud, identity misuse. Depending on the intent, this could be considered grand larceny by deception. They could face substantial legal consequences, jail time, a criminal record, huge fines. Not just Chloe, but Ethan too, if he was aware and complicit." The words hung in the air, stark and powerful. Jail time, criminal record. For Ethan. Eleanor felt a flicker of pain, a maternal instinct to shield him, but it was quickly overridden by the memory of his cold text, his silence in the face of Chloe's outrageous demands. He had chosen his path. "I'm not looking to ruin them, Beatrice," Eleanor said, her voice softer but firm. "Not like that anyway. I just want them to understand that what they did has consequences, that I won't be disrespected and I won't be taken advantage of." She wanted justice, not outright destruction. Not yet, anyway. The idea of Ethan in jail was a bitter pill, but the idea of him getting away with this was even worse. They spent the next few hours meticulously drafting a legally sound statement. It wasn't a threat, but a meticulously worded declaration of facts outlining the forged signature, the lack of consent, and the legal ramifications if the matter were to be pursued. It demanded the immediate invalidation of any agreement bearing her forged signature and a clear withdrawal of the $85,000 demand. It was firm, unequivocal, and devoid of emotion. As Beatrice gathered her papers, her expression was one of quiet admiration. Eleanor, they don't get to define who you are. Not anymore. You're the one holding the match. Light it when you're ready. She placed a hand on Eleanor's arm, a silent message of support and empowerment. After Beatrice left, the quiet in the kitchen felt different, no longer heavy with dread but charged with a simmering energy. Eleanor picked up her leather-bound notebook. Beneath the single-word plan, she wrote another, in bold, decisive strokes. Watch. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. A gold-foiled wedding invitation, misdelivered to Mrs. Lydia Jenkins, reveals Eleanor's complete exclusion from Ethan's lavish wedding at Ashbourne Estate. Eleanor then infiltrates the wedding planner's Vera Rowe online vendor documents, discovering her name listed as primary funder with a fabricated email address, a surgical removal of her true identity. This revelation confirms her worst fears. She wasn't just excluded, but impersonated, making it a clear case of fraud. Eleanor calls Samuel Hayes, an old investigator friend of Arthur's, meticulously relaying every detail. Samuel remarks dryly, "Sounds like someone's trying to have their cake, your checkbook, and eat it too," advising her, "Don't let them trick you into thinking this is about hurt feelings. This is theft." Eleanor prints all the incriminating evidence, labeling the folder insurance. The son, usually a welcome visitor in Eleanor's kitchen, felt harsh and intrusive after Beatrice's departure. Eleanor moved through the house with a quiet purpose, the word watch still resonating in her mind. Her gaze fell on a small stack of mail on the hallway table. Among the usual flyers and bills, a glint of gold caught her eye. It was an envelope, heavy and luxurious, addressed not to her, but to Mrs. Lydia Jenkins, her next-door neighbor. Misdelivered. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, tugged at her. Lydia was out of town visiting her sister. Eleanor carefully opened the envelope. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a gold-foiled wedding invitation. The script was elegant, florid, announcing the marriage of Ethan Vance and Chloe Sterling. The venue, emblazoned in bold calligraphy, confirmed the scale of the affair, the exclusive Ashbourne Estate, known for its opulent weddings and breathtaking grounds. Her eyes scanned the guest names, but Eleanor Vance's name was conspicuously absent, just as Ethan had promised. The lavishness of it, the sheer expense, hammered home the audacity of their demand. They were celebrating in grandeur, paid for by a phantom funder, a mother they had banished. A cold, steely resolve hardened Eleanor's features. This wasn't just a slight. This was deliberate. With a renewed sense of purpose, she logged onto her computer. She remembered Chloe mentioning her wedding planner, a woman named Vera Rowe, in a dismissive conversation months ago. It wasn't hard to find Vera Rowe's website, sleek and professional, showcasing stunning wedding portfolios. Eleanor's fingers flew across the keyboard, driven by a primal need for answers. She found a client login portal, and a hunch, cold and certain, led her to try a combination of Ethan's name and Chloe's birthday as a password. To her chilling surprise, it worked. She was in. The portal was a treasure trove of vendor contracts, guest lists, and financial summaries. Eleanor's breath hitched as she navigated to the financial section. There, under primary funder, was her name, Eleanor Vance, and beside it an email address she'd never seen before, a fabricated string of letters and numbers. It was a digital ghost, a surgical removal of her true identity, replaced by a convenient fiction. The invoice, the contract, the demand for $85,000. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "I hadn't just been excluded," she whispered, her voice a rough whisper in the quiet room. "I had been impersonated, and that meant this wasn't a personal slight anymore. It was fraud. It was a crime. The legal ramifications Beatrice had outlined now felt not just theoretical, but terrifyingly real. They weren't just asking her to pay, they were forcing her into it, using her identity as a shield for their extravagance. Without hesitation, Eleanor picked up the phone again. She dialed a number she hadn't called in years, a number etched into her memory from Arthur's Rolodex, Samuel Hayes. Samuel, Arthur's gruff but brilliant private investigator friend, a man who dealt in facts, not emotions. "Sam, it's Eleanor Vance," she said, her voice betraying none of the tremor she felt inside, but a gruff voice answered. "Eleanor? Well, that's a surprise. Everything all right?" "No, Sam," she stated, her voice remarkably steady. "Nothing is all right. I need your help. It's about Ethan and his fiancée, Chloe." She meticulously relayed every detail, leaving nothing out. The $85,000 bill, the forged signature on the venue agreement, the fabricated email address as the primary funder on the wedding planner's portal. My complete exclusion from the wedding itself, despite being listed as paying for it. Each piece of information was delivered with precision, a carefully constructed narrative of betrayal and deceit. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Sam's dry, gravelly voice cut through the quiet. "Sounds like someone's trying to have their cake, your checkbook, and eat it too, Eleanor." "It's worse than that, Sam," Eleanor replied, a cold edge entering her tone. "They signed a contract in my name. They committed fraud." "Indeed they did," Sam confirmed, his voice now serious. "And you're right to see it that way. Don't let them trick you into thinking this is about hurt feelings or a misunderstanding. This is theft, pure and simple." His words, blunt and unforgiving, were a balm to Eleanor's lacerated spirit. He understood. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty of it. He saw the crime. "What do I do now, Sam?" she asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Keep gathering everything, Eleanor. Print it all. Every email, every document, every scrap of proof you have of this impersonation and fraud. And keep it safe. Think of it as your insurance policy." Eleanor spent the rest of the afternoon hunched over her printer, ink cartridges whirring to life as she copied every incriminating piece of evidence. The bill, the venue agreement, screenshots of the wedding planner's portal, the fabricated email. She created a new folder, stiff and unyielding, and with a black marker, she wrote one word on its tab, a word that perfectly encapsulated the potent weapon she now held. Insurance. If you're finding this story as unbelievable as I am, don't miss a single twist. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. Samuel Hayes joins Eleanor, transforming her dining table into a strategic war room, stressing the premeditated nature of the fraud. Whoever created this didn't just want your money, they wanted your silence. He guides Eleanor on documenting and notarizing her statement, backing up every file. His crucial advice: you need leverage, a crack in their perfect image. Not to destroy them, just to remind them who taught them to stand. Eleanor processes her emotions during a reflective walk, accepting the pain. She then writes, "Stage 1 is silence. Stage 2 is exposure." Eleanor contacts Olivia Reed, a journalist she knows, hinting at a story involving public money, deception, in a well-known venue. Well, yeah, Olivia promises to prepare a story, keeping it anonymous for now, if it escalates. Ethan texts Eleanor, "Hey, Mom, hope you're well. Wanted to check if you got the bill. Let me know if you need help wiring the funds." Eleanor opts for silence, letting him feel the quiet stretch. Samuel Hayes arrived with the efficiency of a seasoned professional, his presence filling Eleanor's usually quiet dining room with a new focused energy. He brought with him an old-school briefcase, its clasps clicking open to reveal stacks of forms, notepads, and even a small, secure hard drive. The elegant dining table, usually reserved for holiday meals, quickly became a strategic war room, scattered with printouts, legal pads, and the folder ominously labeled insurance. "This isn't just about a bill, Eleanor," Sam said, his voice gravelly but clear as he reviewed the evidence. He tapped a finger on the forged signature on the venue agreement. "Whoever created this didn't just want your money. They wanted your silence. They wanted to tie you to the pond without giving you a voice or even a presence." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. This was premeditated, calculated. The word premeditated sent a fresh wave of ice through Eleanor. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment. It was a carefully constructed plan to extract funds and erase her from the narrative. That made the betrayal even deeper, even more personal. Sam spent hours with her, guiding her through the meticulous process of formalizing her position. "We need to document everything," he insisted. "Every email, every text message, every screenshot. Get your statement notarized, affirming you never signed this agreement, never authorized this email, never agreed to fund this wedding. Back up every single file, preferably in multiple locations. The more official, the more undeniable, the better." As they worked, he offered crucial advice, not just on legal procedure, but on strategy. "You need leverage, Eleanor, not to destroy them entirely, not yet anyway, but to create a crack in their perfect image, to remind them who taught them to stand, who built them up. You hold the power here, even if they don't know it yet." He stressed the importance of playing her hand carefully, of timing. A whisper can be louder than a shout, if delivered at the right moment. After Sam left, the house felt empty again, but Eleanor was no longer alone in her resolve. She went for a long walk around her neighborhood, the crisp autumn air a balm against the churning in her mind. She let herself feel the anger, the hurt, the profound sense of betrayal. She acknowledged the deep, aching wound of her son's complicity. But she also felt a quiet strength, a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. She had faced adversity before, raised a son alone, built a life from scraps. This was just another challenge, albeit one laced with bitter irony. She accepted the pain, not as a weakness, but as fuel for the fire within her. Back in her quiet sanctuary, Eleanor opened her notebook. Beneath plan and watch, she wrote 2 more lines, defining the phases of her retribution. Stage 1 is silence. Stage 2 is exposure. The next call she made was to Olivia Reed, a sharp, tenacious journalist she knew through a local community outreach program. Olivia had a reputation for digging deep, for unearthing truths. Eleanor spoke carefully, hinting at a developing story, a local scandal. "Olivia," she began, "I have a story brewing that might interest you. It involves public money, deception, and a well-known venue." She refrained from naming names, maintaining her strategic silence, but planted the seed. Olivia, always keen for a scoop, was intrigued. "Public money, Eleanor? Deception? Tell me more." "Not yet," Eleanor said, a hint of steel in her voice. "But I wanted you to be ready. If it escalates, I might need your help to tell the true story, anonymously, for now." "Consider me prepared, Eleanor," Olivia promised. "I'll start getting a framework ready, just in case. Keep me posted." Just as Eleanor hung up, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Ethan. "Hey, Mom, hope you're well. Wanted to check if you got the bill. Let me know if you need help wiring the funds." A cold, mirthless smile touched Eleanor's lips. Help wiring the funds. The sheer audacity, the thinly veiled pressure, the complete lack of awareness. He thought she was merely struggling to navigate online banking, not silently assembling a dossier of their crimes. Eleanor stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the reply button. But then she remembered Sam's advice. You need leverage, a crack in their perfect image, and her own internal mantra. Stage 1 is silence. She put the phone down, leaving the message unread. Let him wonder. Let him stew. Let him feel the quiet stretch, as she thought, the uncomfortable silence where he expected frantic calls or desperate pleas. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, about control, and for now, Eleanor had it. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. With steel in her spine, Eleanor sends a meticulously crafted email to Vera Rowe, the wedding planner, with the subject, urgent invoice discrepancy and unauthorized use of identity. The email declares, I am not contributing to this event. Any appearance of financial authorization from me is fraudulent, attaching her notarized statement and screenshots of the forged spreadsheet. Vera's immediate panicked reply confirms payments are paused and the venue will be terminated within 48 hours without verification, prompting Eleanor to exhale. Let the cracks begin. Ethan, Chloe, and Vera's calls flood her voicemail, which she deliberately ignores. Eleanor calls Olivia Reed. You'll want to start writing because I think the story is about to get interesting. Chloe's email, "You're being dramatic, please stop," is dismissed by Eleanor, who then closes her notebook, adding 3 words, Stage 3, collapse. The quiet stretch of Eleanor's silence had lasted just long enough. The air around her hummed with a nascent power, a coiled tension waiting to be released. With steel in her spine, a resolve born of years of quiet endurance and recent stark betrayal, Eleanor sat before her computer. She opened her email, her fingers moving with precision. This was it, the first strike. She composed the email carefully, each word chosen for its legal weight and chilling clarity. The subject line alone was a weapon: urgent invoice discrepancy and unauthorized use of identity. She addressed it to Vera Rowe, the wedding planner, whose digital portal held the smoking gun. The body of the email was concise, professional, and utterly devoid of personal emotion. Dear Ms. Rowe, it has come to my attention that an invoice for $85,000 for the upcoming wedding of Ethan Vance and Chloe Sterling has been issued in my name. And furthermore, an agreement bearing a forged signature purporting to be mine, along with a fabricated email address, lists me as the primary funder. I wish to make it unequivocally clear. I am not contributing to this event financially or otherwise. Any appearance of financial authorization or commitment from me is fraudulent and was made without my knowledge or consent. I have attached a notarized statement to this effect, along with screenshots of the fraudulent documentation found on your client portal. I advise you to immediately cease all financial arrangements that list me as a party. Any attempt to collect funds from me based on these fraudulent documents will be met with full legal action for fraud and identity theft. Consider this my formal notification. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. With a steady hand, she attached the notarized statement Beatrice had helped her prepare, along with the damning screenshots of the forged spreadsheet from Vera's own portal. Then she hit send. The email vanished into the digital ether. A silent missile launched. It wasn't long before the first ripple hit. Less than an hour later, her inbox pinged. It was Vera Rowe, the wedding planner, and the reply was pure, unadulterated panic. Subject, urgent. Eleanor Vance, wedding of Ethan Vance and Chloe Sterling. Dear Ms. Vance, I am utterly shocked by your email. We were assured all authorizations were legitimate. I have immediately paused all payments and expenditures related to your name. Please be advised, without immediate verification of funds and a valid signed agreement, the Ashbourne Estate venue contract explicitly states it will be terminated within 48 hours. This will result in significant penalties and loss of deposit. Please call me immediately to clarify this grave misunderstanding. Sincerely, Vera Rowe. Eleanor read the email, a slow, satisfying exhale escaping her lips. Let the cracks begin, she murmured, watching the panic unfold. The illusion of their perfect, expensive wedding was already crumbling. The foundation, built on deceit and her forged identity, was unstable. Almost immediately, her phone began to vibrate. Ethan, Chloe, Vera Rowe, call after call, message after message, flooding her voicemail, each one more frantic than the last. She let them ring, letting their desperation echo into the empty space of her unanswered silence. She imagined their faces, the dawning horror, as their carefully constructed lie began to unravel. With a sense of grim satisfaction, Eleanor dialed Olivia Reed. Olivia Matayeda Himayan. Via, she said, her voice calm and even. You'll want to start writing that story now, because I think the story is about to get interesting. Very interesting indeed. She briefly recounted the content of her email to Vera Rowe and the planner's panicked response, still keeping specific names out for now, maintaining her control of the narrative. Olivia's voice crackled with excitement. Eleanor, this sounds exactly like the kind of exposé I live for. Public money, you said? Well, a large, well-known wedding venue certainly qualifies as a public interest story if fraud is involved. I'll get the outline solidified. Keep me updated on any developments. A few minutes later, another email arrived, this one from Chloe Sterling. Subject, urgent invoice discrepancy and unauthorized use of identity. Eleanor, what are you doing? This is completely uncalled for. You're being dramatic. Please stop this immediately. You're ruining everything. Call us. Eleanor read Chloe's email, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Dramatic, she scoffed. She scoffed softly. This is just the beginning. She didn't reply. She didn't call. She simply observed, letting them twist in the wind of their own making. She closed her notebook, her gaze lingering on the words, plan, watch. Stage 1 is silence. Stage 2 is exposure. With a firm hand, she added 3 more words, marking the inevitable next phase. Stage 3, collapse. Sheesh. Bow. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. Eleanor dresses purposefully in a dark turtleneck and Arthur's brooch, projecting an unyielding presence before arriving unannounced at the Ashbourne estate. In the planning room, she sees her name absent from the family seating chart. A flustered Vera Rowe attempts to deflect with miscommunication, but Eleanor sharply corrects her. You accepted a contract based on falsified identity. That's not a miscommunication. That's negligence. She hands Vera a folder of evidence stating, I'm not pressing charges, not today, but if a single cent is charged to my name, I will reconsider. Eleanor delivers her ultimatum. Tell Chloe and Ethan they have 48 hours to make alternate arrangements, or the venue pulls the plug. Ethan's strained voicemail protests her actions, but Eleanor understands this isn't about a party, but years of silent disrespect. She calls Olivia Reed, confirming, Eleanor, it's time. The story's real. The evidence is clean and dictates the headline. Family wedding halted over allegations of fraud and identity misuse, with the subheader, Mother claims she was erased from son's life, but not from the bill. Eleanor chose her outfit with deliberate care. Not the soft pastels she usually favored, but a dark, almost somber turtleneck, tailored trousers, and polished leather shoes. Around her neck, she pinned Arthur's silver brooch, a small, intricate piece that had been his grandmother's. It was a subtle nod to her past, a silent anchor in her present. Today, she wasn't just a mother, she was a woman wronged, a force to be reckoned with, projecting an unyielding presence. She drove to the Ashbourne estate, the sprawling, opulent venue Chloe had so eagerly chosen. The ornate gates, the manicured lawns, the majestic stone facade, it all screamed expense, a stark contrast to the quiet sacrifices that had paved Ethan's life. Eleanor felt no awe, only a cold sense of righteous anger. Walking into the grand lobby, she bypassed the reception desk and found her way to the wedding planning offices, her steps firm and unwavering. Vera Rowe's assistant, a young woman with a harried expression, looked up in surprise as Eleanor entered without an appointment. Can I help you, madam? She asked, clearly flustered. I'm Eleanor Vance, Eleanor stated, her voice calm but leaving no room for argument. I believe Ms. Rowe is expecting me. The assistant, recognizing the name from the flurry of frantic emails and calls, paled visibly. She led Eleanor to a private planning room, a space filled with swatches of fabric, floral arrangements, and various seating charts. On a large board, Eleanor's eyes immediately fell on a meticulously arranged family seating chart. Her name was, predictably, absent, not even a token mention at a distant table. The insult, already deep, twisted further. Moments later, Vera Rowe herself bustled in, her face a mask of practiced politeness struggling against genuine panic. Ms. Vance, what a surprise! We were just trying to reach you. There seems to have been a terrible miscommunication. Her voice was high, strained, attempting to deflect blame. Eleanor cut her off, her voice low and sharp, each word precisely aimed. Ms. Rowe, let me be clear. You accepted a contract based on falsified identity, a forged signature, and a fabricated email address. That's not a miscommunication. That's negligence, and potentially it's complicity and fraud. Vera blanched, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. But Ethan and Chloe assured us. They assured you a lie, Eleanor countered, her gaze unwavering. She opened the folder she carried, pulling out her notarized statement, the copies of the forged contract, the screenshots of Vera's own client portal. She placed the folder on the table between them, sliding it across with deliberate slowness. This folder, she stated, contains documented proof of identity theft and financial fraud. I'm not pressing charges. Not today. Her voice hardened, becoming a promise. But if a single cent is charged to my name, or if this miscommunication impacts my credit or my finances in any way, I will reconsider. And I assure you, Ms. Rowe, the consequences will be severe for everyone involved. Vera stared at the folder, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The implications, both legal and reputational, were clearly registering. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper of authority. Now you have 48 hours to inform Chloe Sterling and Ethan Vance that they need to make alternate arrangements for their wedding. Failing that, the Ashbourne estate will pull the plug on their event, effective immediately, with full loss of their deposit and any other contractual penalties. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Make sure they understand. The clock is ticking. As Eleanor walked out, leaving a stunned Vera in her wake, her phone buzzed. A new voicemail. It was Ethan, his voice strained, bordering on furious. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Vera just called us, saying you're trying to cancel the wedding. You're going to ruin everything. This is benign. Don't go to war over a party. Eleanor listened, a bitter taste in her mouth. A party, he called it. He still didn't understand. This was never about a party. This was about years of silent disrespect, of her sacrifices being taken for granted, of being erased from his life, yet still expected to pay. This was about reclaiming her dignity, her identity, her life. She walked out into the crisp autumn air, the grandeur of the estate now seeming pathetic, a monument to a hollow dream. She pulled out her phone and called Olivia Reed. Eleanor, Olivia's voice was sharp with anticipation. It's time, isn't it? It's time, Olivia, Eleanor confirmed, a quiet power in her voice. The story's real, the evidence is clean, and the clock is ticking for a very public collapse. What's the headline? Olivia asked, already typing. Eleanor paused, picturing her son, his entitled fiancée, and the grand, fraudulent wedding that was about to unravel. She dictated, her voice resonating with a quiet, devastating finality. Headline: Family wedding halted over allegations of fraud and identity misuse. Subheader: Mother claims she was erased from son's life, but not from the bill. And here's a summary of what's unfolding. The anonymously sourced article runs online. Its thin veil making the story locally recognizable, prompting calls from church friends, texts of support, and a note from Mrs. Lydia Jenkins. You're not invisible. Not to us. Chloe Sterling appears at Eleanor's door, distraught and makeupless, whispering, What did you do? Eleanor simply replies, I told the truth. Eleanor receives a call from Mr. Sterling, Chloe's father, Colby Miles, who attempts to buy her silence, but Eleanor firmly refuses, demanding respect instead of revenge. Her final demand: I want them to stand in that venue and know it's only happening because the woman they tried to erase refused to disappear. Mr. Sterling anonymously wires the payment, and the wedding is back on. Eleanor writes, Stage 4, witness. Samuel Hayes advises, show up in red. Eleanor finds Arthur's deep crimson silk dress, a symbol of defiance, and visits the estate, observing the empty, modern, clean, numb sweetheart table before leaving, determined to give their performance the audience it deserves. The article hit online like a silent, devastating wave. Olivia Reed had done her job magnificently. The headline, Family Wedding Halted over Allegations of Fraud and Identity Misuse, blazed across local news sites, followed by the subheader, Mother claims she was erased from son's life, but not from the bill. Though Eleanor's name wasn't explicitly mentioned, the details were clear enough for anyone in their small, close-knit community to recognize. The Ashbourne estate, a son named Ethan, a lavish wedding on the brink of cancellation. The thin veil of anonymity was transparent. Her phone, once silent, now vibrated incessantly. Calls from church friends, their voices a mix of concern and hushed outrage. Texts from acquaintances offering support. And then a note slipped under her door. A simple, heartfelt message from Mrs. Lydia Jenkins, her neighbor whose misdelivered invitation had been the first clue. Eleanor, it read in a shaky hand, you're not invisible. Not to us. A warmth, both comforting and heartbreaking, spread through Eleanor. She wasn't alone. The doorbell rang, a frantic, insistent peal that shattered the quiet. Eleanor opened it to find Chloe Sterling on her porch. Not the impeccably put-together fiancée she usually presented, but a distraught, makeupless young woman, her eyes red-rimmed, her designer clothes disheveled. "What did you do?" Chloe whispered, her voice raw, tinged with disbelief and fury. "What did you do?" Eleanor looked at her, devoid of pity, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I told the truth," she replied simply, her voice calm and even. She offered no further explanation, no defense, no apology. She had spoken her piece in the article. Chloe could read it there. Chloe stared at her for a long moment, then turned and stumbled away, leaving the heavy silence of accusation hanging in the air. Later that day, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed an unknown number. Eleanor answered. "Eleanor Vance speaking." A deep, commanding voice responded. "Miss Vance, this is Colby Miles, Chloe's father." "Mr. Sterling, the man who wielded power and money with casual ease. I understand there's been a misunderstanding about the wedding and a rather embarrassing article." "No misunderstanding, Mr. Miles," Eleanor said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Just facts." "Look, Ms. Vance," Colby Miles continued, his tone smooth, condescending. "I'm prepared to make this right. A generous sum, discreetly transferred, to ensure this unpleasantness goes away, and that the wedding proceeds without further public drama." He was trying to buy her silence, to sweep the truth back under the rug with a wad of cash. Eleanor felt a cold surge of indignation. "You don't get to buy my silence, Mr. Miles. You don't get to buy my dignity. You want revenge? I want respect." Her voice was quiet, but it resonated with an unshakable conviction. "My son, your daughter, they tried to erase me, to use my name for their own gain while discarding me. That is not a misunderstanding." There was a pause, a tense silence on the line. Colby Miles was clearly unaccustomed to being refused, to having his power challenged. "What do you want, then?" he finally ground out, a hint of frustration in his voice. Eleanor had considered this. Her demands were not for money, not for an apology. "I want them to stand in that venue, Mr. Miles," she said, her voice clear and strong, "in front of all those people at their lavish wedding that they tried to defraud me into paying for. And I want them to know, with every fiber of their being, that it's only happening because the woman they tried to erase refused to disappear." Colby Miles hung up without another word. True to his word, "Punish." The payment was anonymously wired, not to Eleanor's account, but directly to the Ashbourne estate. The wedding was back on. Vera Rowe sent a terse, apologetic email, confirming all agreements were now fully funded, no longer tied to Eleanor Vance. Eleanor opened her notebook, her fingers tracing the words: plan, watch. Stage 1 is silence. Stage 2 is exposure. Stage 3, collapse. Now she added the final step in her retribution. Stage 4, witness. A call from Samuel Hayes came shortly after. "Heard the news, Eleanor. Good work. Now for the finale, I have a piece of advice." "Oh?" Eleanor prompted, a flicker of anticipation in her voice. "Show up in red," Sam said simply. "Make them see you." Red, a color of defiance, of power, of blood. A perfect choice. Eleanor went to her wardrobe, searching through long-forgotten dresses. At the very back, she found it. Arthur's deep crimson silk dress, a gift from him years ago, worn only a few times. It shimmered in the dim light, a symbol of a different life, and now a symbol of her quiet, unyielding strength. A few days before the rescheduled wedding, Eleanor paid a visit to the Ashbourne estate. She walked through the grand halls, now buzzing with final preparations, feeling like a ghost haunting her own future. She saw the sweetheart table where Ethan and Chloe would sit, empty, modern, clean, numb in its sterile perfection. She paused, then turned to leave, a cold, determined glint in her eyes. Their performance, she thought, deserved an audience, and she would be there to ensure they fully understood the price of their redemption. Here's a summary of what's unfolding. On the rainy wedding morning, Eleanor arrives at the Ashbourne estate in her bold crimson silk dress. Chloe freezes, and Ethan stares in disbelief as Eleanor enters. A voice from the band's speaker then announces, "We'd like to take a moment to thank the woman whose unexpected generosity saved this event from total collapse. Eleanor Vance." Eleanor smiles a slow, deliberate acknowledgement, then turns and walks out into the rain, leaving stunned silence. Ethan texts, "We need to talk. Please, just us." Eleanor replies, "You know where I live." Ethan arrives soaked and alone. "Mom," he says. Eleanor states his, "I reminded you I exist." Ethan confesses Chloe's misguided attempt at a cleaner, more elegant exclusion. Eleanor confronts him. "She forged my name." Ethan admits, "I didn't know. You didn't ask." He whispers, "I don't know how we got here." Eleanor responds, "You remembered what it meant. You just decided it didn't apply to me anymore." Ethan admits, "I'm ashamed." Eleanor says, "That's a start." Eleanor offers, "It won't be easy and it won't be fast." Ethan replies, "I want to try, if you'll let me." She offers him chamomile tea, a quiet gesture of a new beginning. Weeks pass. Ethan sends subtle messages, acknowledging their shared past. Chloe goes quiet. Samuel informs Eleanor the Lexington Herald is doing a piece on financial abuse using her name. Eleanor writes a letter to herself. "Dear Eleanor, you survived the quiet eraser. You were never disposable." Ethan arrives with the groceries, offering to make chicken and dumplings from her old recipe. Over dinner, Ethan confesses, "I'm not here to win you back. I just wanted to sit across from you and not feel like a stranger." Eleanor replies, "You're not a stranger. You're just new." Ethan reveals he's in therapy and has repaid all vendors, explaining, "Because if I can't undo what I did, at least I can clean up the mess." A photo arrives from Ethan, Eleanor in her red dress at the estate, with the words, "You were never invisible." Eleanor clears a spare room for a new writing space, pruning roses, and receiving a note of anonymous admiration. She toasts to herself, "To Eleanor Vance, the woman who wouldn't disappear." The wedding morning dawned gray and rainy, mirroring the tumultuous emotions Eleanor felt within her. But as she surveyed her reflection in the mirror, clad in Arthur's deep crimson silk dress, a quiet strength settled over her. The dress, a rich, vibrant hue, was a stark contrast to the subdued colors she usually favored, a declaration in itself. Today, she was not just Eleanor Vance. She was a symbol of defiance, a force that refused to be overlooked. She arrived at the Ashbourne estate just as the ceremony was about to begin, slipping in through a side entrance, an uninvited guest with a very specific purpose. The grand hall was filled with expectant faces, the air thick with the scent of lilies and nervous excitement. As she walked down the aisle, her presence, vivid and unmistakable, drew all eyes. Chloe at the altar in her pristine white gown froze, her carefully composed features contorting in shock and anger. Ethan beside her stared, his jaw slack, disbelief etched across his handsome face. He hadn't expected her. No one had. Eleanor didn't pause, didn't acknowledge their stares. She simply walked, her head held high, until she reached a small, unobtrusive spot near the back. She settled into a vacant seat, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She wasn't there to disrupt the ceremony, but to witness their performance. Just as the music swelled, a voice, amplified by the band's speaker, cut through the air. It was Vera Rowe, the wedding planner, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness, a hint of forced sincerity. "Before we begin this beautiful union," she announced, clearly under duress, "we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge a very special individual. The woman whose unexpected generosity truly saved this event from total collapse and ensured that Ethan and Chloe could celebrate their love in this magnificent venue. We'd like to extend our deepest gratitude to Eleanor Vance." A ripple went through the crowd. Eyes turned to Eleanor, a mix of curiosity and murmuring recognition. Chloe's face was beet red, a furious whisper passing between her and Ethan. Ethan, however, had turned to stare at his mother, a complex mix of shame and dawning realization in his eyes. Eleanor slowly, deliberately met his gaze. Her smile widened, a slow, knowing acknowledgement. Then with an elegant turn, she rose from her seat and without a word, walked back down the aisle and out of the hall, leaving behind a stunned silence, the sound of the rain outside now seeming to amplify the quiet thunder of her departure. Hours later, as dusk settled, her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. We need to talk. Please, just us. Eleanor waited a beat, then replied, You know where I live. He arrived 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain, his expensive suit clinging to him. He looked younger, smaller, stripped of his usual polished veneer. He stood on her porch, hesitant, like a child unsure if he was welcome. Mom, he began, his voice rough. Come in, Ethan, Eleanor said, stepping aside. She led him to the kitchen, the familiar scent of chamomile tea brewing. She offered him a towel, watching him carefully. I reminded you I exist, Eleanor stated, cutting through the silence that hung between them. Ethan nodded, his head bowed. Chloe, she just wanted everything to be cleaner, more elegant, without complications. He finally looked up, his eyes pleading for understanding. She didn't mean to hurt you. She forged my name, Ethan, Eleanor said, her voice quiet but firm. She committed a crime, and you allowed it. You knew I wasn't invited, yet you let her send that bill, expecting me to pay for a wedding I was explicitly banned from. He flinched. I didn't know about the forgery. Not until Vera's email, I swear, Mom. You didn't ask. I didn't ask because I shouldn't have to, Ethan, she retorted, her voice tinged with the pain of years of unacknowledged sacrifice. I should have been your first call, not an afterthought. He ran a hand through his wet hair. I don't know how we got here, Mom. You remembered what it meant to have a mother, Ethan, she replied, her voice soft now. You just decided it didn't apply to me anymore. You forgot who you were, or at least who you used to be. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm ashamed, Mom, so ashamed. That's a start, Eleanor said, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile but real, igniting within her. It won't be easy, Ethan, and it won't be fast. He met her gaze, his own filled with a desperate longing. I want to try, Mom. I want to make it right. If you'll let me. Eleanor poured him a steaming cup of chamomile tea, a quiet gesture, a new beginning. Weeks turned into months. Ethan sent subtle messages, not apologies, but acknowledgments of their shared past. An old photo of them hiking, a memory of a childhood joke. Chloe, on the other hand, went completely quiet, a silence that suited Eleanor just fine. Samuel Hayes called with news. Eleanor, the Lexington Herald is doing a follow-up piece on financial abuse in families. They're using your story, with your consent this time, as a powerful example. Your name will be prominent. Eleanor felt a strange mixture of vindication and peace. She took out her leather-bound notebook, turning to a fresh page, and wrote a letter to herself. Dear Eleanor, you survived the quiet eraser. You stood up and you spoke your truth. You were never disposable. One afternoon, a knock came at her door. It was Ethan, not in a suit, but in jeans and a worn sweater, carrying 2 bags of groceries. Mom, he said, a tentative smile on his face. I was thinking, chicken and dumplings? Your old recipe? Eleanor, surprised, simply nodded. Together they moved into the kitchen, a quiet, unfamiliar rhythm settling between them. As they chopped vegetables, the silence was no longer heavy with unspoken resentment, but with the fragile hope of reconciliation. Over dinner, as the comforting aroma of chicken and dumplings filled the air, Ethan spoke. I'm not here to win you back, Mom, he confessed, his voice earnest. I just wanted to sit across from you and not feel like a stranger anymore. Eleanor reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You're not a stranger, Ethan, she said softly. You're just new. He revealed he'd been in therapy, confronting his choices, the influences that had shaped him. He also admitted to repaying all the vendors for the wedding from his own funds and sending official letters to clear Eleanor's name from any association. Because if I can't undo what I did, he explained, at least I can clean up the mess. A few days later, a photo arrived in her inbox. It was taken discreetly by a guest at the wedding, a powerful, candid shot of Eleanor in her vibrant red dress, walking out of the Ashbourne estate, her head held high, leaving the stunned silence in her wake. Beneath the photo, Ethan had simply written, You were never invisible. Eleanor looked around her small house, a place that once felt like a quiet prison of her own making. She decided to clear out the spare room, transforming it into a light-filled writing space, a place for new beginnings, new stories. She spent afternoons pruning her roses, finding joy in nurturing new growth. One morning, she found a small, handwritten note tucked into her mailbox, addressed anonymously. "Thank you, Eleanor. Your courage gave me strength." That evening, as the last rays of sun painted her kitchen in hues of orange and purple, Eleanor poured herself a cup of her favorite mint tea. She raised it in a silent toast. "To Eleanor Vance," she whispered, her voice strong and clear. "The woman who wouldn't disappear. My name is Elaine Morgan. I spent my whole life sacrificing for my only son, Nathan. I gave up promotions, skipped vacations, and even sold my wedding ring just to cover his college bills. I never asked for thanks. I only dreamed of seeing him happy on his wedding day. But then came the envelope. Not an invitation, a bill, 85,000, and a cold note from his fiancée, Claire. You should be honored to contribute. They banned me from the wedding, yet expected me to pay for their fantasy. I sat there in my quiet kitchen, the same one where I once taught him to tie his shoes, now holding a paper that tried to erase everything I meant. But I didn't scream, didn't cry. Instead, I made tea, opened my old laptop, and made a decision. They wanted a perfect wedding. I would show them what the real cost of perfection looked like when built on deceit and forgotten love. What followed was a quiet storm of legal strategies, exposing their fraud, a public reckoning, and a confrontation that shook their carefully constructed world. Nathan eventually faced the shame of his choices, and though the path to healing is long and complex, a fragile bridge is being rebuilt. I reclaimed my name, my story, and my worth. I was never invisible, never disposable. My son may have forgotten me for a time, but I reminded him and myself that I existed, and that some bonds, though tested, can still endure. The journey redefined me, not as a victim, but as a woman who found her voice and her power when pushed to the brink.